As of this month, I have been preaching for 40 years. I've delivered more than, it wasn't all at once. I've delivered more than 2,000 sermons. And I would estimate that in the first 39 years of that preaching, nearly 2,000 sermons, I probably mentioned who was President of the United States at any given time maybe a couple of dozen times. I don't think I ever mentioned Carter or Reagan during their presidency. And I was preaching during all that time, and I think I probably mentioned a few times that George W. Bush was a war criminal, but I didn't. Obviously, I like some of them more than others. You know, I prefer the ones that were more civil rights minded and progressive. But you know, a president is sort of like a taxi driver. They have a job to do, and if they do it basically correctly, you hardly notice them. I suspect that most of us here, though we've ridden in taxis a lot, we probably couldn't name the name of a single taxi driver. If you happen, however, to be in a taxi when the driver wrecks the car, you might remember that person's name forever. So in the past year, it's been difficult to write a single sermon that doesn't mention our current train wreck of a president. I don't want to talk about him. I don't want to think about him. I don't want to hear his voice, and I don't want to see his picture. He is never featured. Sean and Barry could tell you, I send out outlines of sermons a couple of months in advance. He's never in the outline. He just keeps showing up in the text. I always have ideas about important things that I want to talk about other than him, but then he does stuff that just forces its way in. Today, I wanted to talk about ego, and it's difficult to talk about ego without mentioning the most inflated ego standard bearer of the world, which is our current president. But to be completely honest, there is some credit due to our Clementine Caligula, because he is a master manipulator of the media. He has managed to keep himself in the news in a way that, at least initially in real estate development, got him very big loans for risky businesses. It also won him his own reality TV show, which was evidently quite popular, and then remarkably, against all odds, though he was initially seen as just a total joke of a candidate for president, he still managed to defeat both qualified and unqualified contenders for his party's nomination, and not through brilliant debate performances or persuasive speeches, but more by simply dominating the news cycle with one embarrassing scandal after another, and by delivering strings of outrageous lies that we somehow just couldn't muster the internal strength to look away from. The novelty candidate, the clown on the stage, actually won the election to be the most powerful person in the world. Well, maybe he won it. Actually, he probably didn't really win. But in the end, that was the official conclusion. Now, I famously placed a wager that he would be impeached within his first year in office, and I thought it was a safe bet because, frankly, I thought it would only take a month or two. I thought he had committed so many crimes and had so much vulnerability that I didn't expect the inauguration to much take hold before it was all over. But I was wrong. Not because there was not ample evidence to impeach him, but because I made the classic mistake of assuming that members of the Senate would have to act with some integrity. And I have frequently overestimated the obligation of morality exercised by people in elected office. It turns out that the majority of the Senate could not find a conscience with both hands and a 30-minute head start. They simply don't have it. I do believe that he has overplayed his hand, and that an impeachment is in his future. And I don't want to be starry-eyed idealist about this, but I want him to be tried for conspiracy with the Russian government to rig our election. I want him to be tried for money laundering for Russian organized crime. I want him to be tried for egregious emoluments violations and for self-dealing with government contracts and tax cuts, as well as his own tax fraud and organized crime-related business deals. But I am afraid that it may finally come down to a fatal blow delivered by someone who is just as narcissistic and attention-getting as he is. Now, mind you, I will take what I can get. But I am desperately hoping for America to once again find the dignity of a moral high ground. And these people are not that and will not get us there. The fact that our president has evidently cheated on all three of his wives with prostitutes and porn stars is ironically no longer shocking or newsworthy. The only reason we're interviewing prostitutes and porn stars is to figure out whether he paid them off with his own money or with election campaign money, or if they were paid off in order to affect the outcome of the 2016 election. Those are kind of fine points of the law that we would not have applied to any other president. Now, I have personally never watched a reality TV show of any kind, not Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or Bachelor or Voting Them Off the Island. I've never watched a single episode of any of it, unless, of course, watching the morning news is just a remake of The Apprentice. But I can tell you this, over the last several months, I've realized that I need to wait until after I've watched the morning news to take my shower, because after I watch it, I always feel dirty. And I'm being serious about that. It literally, physically makes me feel dirty to think about what they've been doing. Still, in the face of what has become an inevitable impeachment trial, Trump said on Fox News in an interview this week that if he were impeached, he said, without this mind, people would be very poor. He is so delusional that he actually thinks that his intellect is what is guiding the economy and delivering a decent standard of living in America. This delusional little man, who is not very smart, actually sets the high water mark for our topic today, which is about ego. It is sometimes easier to understand a disorder by looking at its most extreme examples. What has become obvious to the world over this past year is that what Trump really wants out of being president is adoration. He has no particular goal, no policy in mind, no ideology about politics. What he wants is to be adored. He has continued holding campaign rallies after he won the election. That doesn't happen in democracies. That happens in totalitarian governments. But he has continued to hold election rallies, especially when bad news comes his way. And his staff has learned when there's bad things about him in the media, they schedule a rally, because if they can get all of the racists and xenophobes and neo-Nazis to come out of the backwaters of America to cheer him on, that actually elevates his mood. But rather than spending any more time this morning exposing the bloated ego of this truly pathetic figure, I think the more helpful thing for us to do is to consider how much of this that we need to own in our own lives, how much of this tendency towards ego is really a part of how we act and think. Because whether we are arrogant or shy, we all want recognition. Now, he can't get enough. No matter how much recognition you give to some people, it's not enough. But we all want some. We want the approval of our parents, even when, in any objective sense, a lot of us had parents that never had both oars in the water at the same time. But we would still like to have their approval. One of the things that corporate researchers have discovered is that many times they get more results in improving employee retention and in workplace morale by giving awards, celebration, and praise than they get from giving employees bigger salaries. Once you make enough money to pay your basic bills and the wolves are not at the door, being appreciated, being valued, being treated with respect and dignity can mean more than money. All during my career as a denominational minister, I was given a very nice raise every year. It was, without question, happened like clockwork. And it's probably true that by the time I ended my 30-year career in a denominational church, I may have been the highest paid minister in that denomination. But there were several budget meetings over the last decade of my tenure within that denomination when they were writing the budget and proposing a nice raise for me that I would say, don't give me another raise, just treat me better. And every year it just made the committee fall silent because they could not even imagine trying to be a church without open hostility, without irrational, vicious debates, slander, attacks going on in board meetings and in cabinet meetings. They handsomely paid me to endure their abuse. I don't make half as much money as I used to, but I also have not seen a therapist or taken antidepressants or had to take Prilosec to keep my stomach from digesting itself over the last decade. And we're lucky around here if we remember to get around to having a board meeting at least once a year. We kind of have to pass a budget and vote on officers, but if it weren't for that, we would almost forget to have meetings. I don't miss them. But still, we're people, aren't we? I think that as faith communities go, we're probably among the more healthy examples of how a church can simultaneously be free of conflict while taking on hard topics. Generally speaking, churches have to choose. They either take on real topics or they peacefully get along. There's conversation among clergy about you can either build a crowd or you can build a church. If you're going to build a church, you have to deal with relevant moral issues. But you don't get to build a big crowd doing that. Because inherently, if you deal with prophetic issues, it creates conflict. So I think as churches go, you are to be commended for letting us be both. We've managed to both be prophetic while we are largely united. Not that there haven't been plenty of attempts at starting ego battles over our decade of history, but by and large, we skate through that. Scott Peck's book, A Different Drum, is the most helpful book I've ever read about community building. And one of the key insights he explains is that a community is always inclusive, that you build community by letting go of racism, of prejudices about sexual orientation or class or education or party affiliations. But the one thing that a community cannot be inclusive of is a lack of inclusivity. That is, when someone insists on dividing the community or insists on rejecting someone else, that person does have to be excluded. Community is inclusive of everything except for a lack of inclusivity. As I wrote in our prayer of confession this morning, it's a lot easier to give recognition and approval when we are guaranteed that we've already got it for ourselves. That when you know for sure that it's coming your way, then you can be very generous towards others. Our egos work like that. But if you want to be the kind of person who actually helps to build community, to heal racism, prejudices, and partisanship, the kind that is currently really dividing our civilization and making our Congress and Senate so divided that they can't even do the most obvious things. I mean, it's unbelievable that the number of crimes committed in our executive branch cannot be discussed within our legislative branch because they're so divided they have to pretend like they don't see the elephant in the room. But if you want to be the kind of person that actually changes that, then you have to make the conscious decision that you are going to give approval and acceptance and affection before you get it. There is emotional risk in trying to be a healer. It deserves to be noted that while those with huge egos are the most noticeable, they're the easiest to make fun of. But I'm guessing that people with bloated egos are outnumbered by those who suffer constant self-doubt and a rabid lack of ego. It's even possible that some of the most narcissistic people in the world are also the ones who have the least self-confidence, the ones that are always blaming themselves for everything that goes wrong. I don't know if Freud really said it, but there's a quote that floats around that says, don't always assume that every conflict is your fault. It could be that you're surrounded by assholes. When I was a pastor in Louisville, Kentucky, there were about 40 disciple congregations in the area, and the ministers met every month, and most of us showed up, and we were convivial and supportive of each other. We went to the hospital to visit each other when we were ill. We celebrated births and marriages and were aware when someone had severe family problems or something. And it was a pretty tight-knit community, but the pastors of the 3 largest churches just never came, and that was their choice. I guess they thought they were too busy or whatever, but they never came. When I came to Springfield, I became the pastor of the largest disciple church in Missouri and the youngest pastor of a large disciple church in the country. And I was determined that I wasn't going to be like those guys in Louisville. I was going to go to the ministers' meetings. And I would go, and everybody there was very rude to me. I kept trying to reach out. I would hold baby showers for people that were having babies, whatever, and everybody went out of their way to be rude to me. And I just kept thinking, what am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? And I finally scheduled an appointment, drove all the way to Nashville, Tennessee, to see my counseling professor, Dr. Liston Mills, one of the preeminent pastoral therapy professors in the world at that time. I truly miss him. I stayed in touch with him years after I graduated. But I sat down with him and I said, Dr. Mills, I am trying to do everything I can to bridge this relationship gap, and I just keep failing. There is not a minister in Springfield, Missouri that likes me. And he was quite droll and tried to be something of a sort of a Buddhist master. He would take his pipe out of his mouth in a deep Southern accent, say, well, Raja, you're going to have to get used to saying, please forgive me for being competent. I can only imagine how that must make you feel. And I said, you understand that I drove 500 miles because they don't like me now. But his point was, it took me some time to process that, is that those of us who are racked with self-doubt, and I put myself in that category, you see me speaking in public and being bold about the things that I do, but you don't know how many nights I toss and turn questioning myself. I'm racked with self-doubt. But he was saying, you're trying to make their behavior your responsibility, and it's probably not. And, you know, I made twice as much money as they did. I was in a church that was 3 or 4 times the size of theirs. There was some professional jealousy. What we in the ministry call steeple envy. It happens. It shouldn't happen, but it happens. And that's why I realized the pastors of larger churches in Louisville didn't go to the meetings. They knew how they would be treated, and I was trying to be different, but, you know. sometimes you just have to accept that it is up to you to do your best, but you still can't control the behavior of others. It's even possible that some of those people that are the meanest are the ones that are the most in pain because of their own self-doubt. Now, I don't want to psychoanalyze our president, but I have heard more than one professional speculating that Trump's hunger for his father's approval, which evidently he never satisfactorily received, is why he is such an insatiable, has such an insatiable appetite for approval from strangers. Now, if he were my son, I'm not sure that I could love him either. That may be a personal problem for me, but it is at least possible that though he appears to be the most narcissistic person in the world, it is at least possible that he is one of the most pathetically hurting people in the world who just can't get enough recognition. Amen. Now, sometimes people who are acting out in the most socially unacceptable ways are not doing so out of an excess of self-confidence, as I'm saying. Sometimes it's the opposite. It's akin to the way that people express prejudice against homosexuals. If you are secure in your sexuality, if you're a heterosexual, why do you care whether Ted, Sue, Billy, or Alice are gay or straight? If you're okay with who you are, why would you care about anybody else's sexual orientation? Now, as a chronically single heterosexual, I wish there were more gay men. I wish it cuts down on the competition, because there's not that many available single women out there. And so if all the rest of the guys were gay, that would be bueno for me. But if you are okay with who you are, why would you need to change anyone else? You know what I mean? The only reason for someone to get really excited about anyone else's sexual orientation is if they've got a nagging self-doubt about their own sexual orientation. You could extend that to religion. If people are coercive about their faith, that you have to somehow come into conformity with what they believe. You know, the person at your door that needs for you to read the Book of Mormon or to read the Jehovah's Witnesses Watchtower. If they're okay with their own faith, why are they so desperate to change you? Aren't they really seeking confirmation of their own faith? If they're secure in their religion, they wouldn't need to change yours. But the more far out, the more untenable, the more ridiculous your religion is, the more you need to find someone who will confirm your irrational beliefs. What I'm saying today, I'm literally begging for some empathetic understanding here, some added patience with the people who oftentimes are the ones who annoy us the most. Everyone needs air. Everyone needs water. Everyone needs food. Everyone needs sleep. But right behind air, food, water, and sleep is a need for some emotional reassurance, some acceptance, some affirmation, if not, in fact, love. And if not, they need some emotional security. I think a lot of people who become hermits have failed to get enough affirmation, and so they are simply protecting themselves from being hurt. But if you deprive someone of food and water long enough, they'll try to take yours. It'll happen. If we deprive other people of acceptance and affirmation, they will try to undermine yours. If they are in pain themselves, they will try to inflict pain on you. Have you ever noticed that the people who are the most likely to be insulting, to cut you down in public, to make fun of you, to be critical of you, are also the kind of people that if you treated them the same way, they would fall into 1,000 pieces right in front of you. They couldn't take it. They may call you names and mistreat you in public, but if anyone ever treated them that way, they would go into hysterics because they're that fragile. Let me share something with you. Many years ago, a group of critics in my former church actually hired a private detective to try to find enough dirt on me to get me fired. I didn't know about it for months. Tapped my phone, put a bug on my car, went through my garbage every week. Somebody, probably several somebodies, spent an awful lot of money trying to get this guy to find something. I'm almost sad to say that he couldn't find anything. It seems like there ought to be something interesting about my personal life, but there just wasn't. I'm not, after all, a member of Congress. I mean, there's not that much to find. But after some years, I finally got a chance to see this Gumshoe's final report, and it was an amazing document to read, because when they couldn't actually find anything, they simply got people to repeat hearsay, and he wrote all that down. I mean, you got to earn your 80 grand somehow, I guess. But there was a woman that he quoted whose husband had very publicly bragged about his sexual exploits with paid sex workers. He was a big-time attorney, worked for Johnny Morris, so he traveled all over the world and availed himself of the services of sex workers everywhere he went, and he was so proud of it, he even told me, and I was his pastor. But the private investigator interviewed this woman, and she said that she had heard that I had prostitutes at my house where I was raising an 8-year-old child by myself. And there was a guy that had fallen into the habit of using his business credit card to pay for his personal lunches and dinners at restaurants, and he got caught, and they were going to fire him, and they were going to charge him criminally. And I thought he was a good guy, so I went around to a bunch of folks, raised several $1,000s, and paid his employer back for the money that he had taken from them so that he wouldn't get a criminal charge. But this investigator interviewed this guy, and he told him that he had heard that I used the church's credit card to pay for my personal bills. And there was an out-of-control alcoholic that told the investigator that she thought that I drank too much. And there was a married woman who was having what she thought was a secret affair with another woman, and she told the investigator that she thought that I was secretly dating men. Now, there was no evidence of any of this, but page after page, each of these people projected their personal greatest disappointment, their biggest embarrassment, onto me. Now, I was angry when I first read this. As you can imagine, these were all people I knew. But once the anger, the initial wave of anger passed, I realized how sad it was that this many people couldn't get their minds off of their own embarrassment, that I had rescued this guy from being charged with embezzling, and rather than feel gratitude for that, he alleged that I embezzled. I mean, you see that? It doesn't make sense, and yet it happens over and over again. And I realized how sad these people are. They cannot get their own failings out of their mind, and so they project them onto other people. This is actually what we call a borderline personality disorder in a professional context, that people cannot accept responsibility for what they have done, so they say that someone else has done it. Now, I don't think it would work in every case, because there are people that are terribly ego deficit, but some people have such a black hole where their ego ought to be that you can't fill it. You just can't fill it. But don't you wonder how each of these people I've just mentioned might have been different if you'd managed to show them acceptance and approval ahead of time? If instead of waiting for them to try to take it in such an unethical way, what if you'd gone out of your way to show them approval, acceptance, friendship, and love? If you found some way to let them know that you knew that they had endured consequential pain, but you still didn't judge them, you accepted them, that you believe that they have inherent worth, that you understand where they failed, but they still have worth. I took as our wisdom lesson today this intriguing quote from the Austrian novelist Stefan Zweig, who says that every gesture of resistance which is void of either risk or impact is nothing but a cry for recognition. Now, many of us spend a good deal of time on social media, and we post and repost our political beliefs. We post our moral outrage, our contempt for crooked politics, a crazy healthcare system, an unjust economic system. And if you're like me, you are posting that to be seen by people who already agree with you. I don't allow anyone in my social media who says things that upset me. So I just, when I'm posting political stuff, I'm preaching to the choir. So why do we do it? Why do we spend so much time doing it? I think we do it because it's cathartic on the one hand, and some days we need catharsis more than others. So we do it to remind ourselves that we're not alone, there are other people that agree with us. But really, what does it accomplish? Nothing. Or to echo Stefan Zweig, what does it cost you? What I'm trying to say today is that we humans are, by our evolutionary nature, social animals. We need each other. There's no denying it. Anyone that tries to deny it is probably lonelier than anyone else. There is no more cruel punishment in our penal system than solitary confinement. And yet most people in the world have damaged or deficit egos in one way or another. Most people in the world, regardless of whether they will ever admit it to themselves or anyone else, are lonely. They're lonely, and they are surrounded by 350 million people. It's not that there's a dearth of possible connections. It is that they are waiting for someone else to make the first move. They are waiting for someone else to take the risk, to reach out, to give us acceptance and approval. And we reserve our own acceptance and approval out of fear of being rejected or hurt. We boldly say in our church, we're a very prophetic church, we want to change the world. We want to change the political system. We want to impeach the president. We want to stop ICE agents from taking children from their parents at the border. We want to reform the prison system. We want to fix the income disparity problem. We want to end racism. And yet we are afraid to invite our next door neighbor to dinner. That, I submit, is a kind of religious hypocrisy. We can only be effective as agents for social change. We can only have legitimacy as a community of faith that regularly says that love is our religion, if we can be successfully connected to other people. A labor union has power if the workers stay together. A political party can influence the outcome of an election if they will quit cannibalizing each other. Democrats are the majority party in the United States and rarely win because they won't stop gnawing on each other's bones. A church can have an impact on the ethical thinking of a society if they don't act like a dysfunctional family that becomes a source of ridicule and a joke to the rest of the world. I'm not asking that we all suddenly become saints through our personal decision-making and sacrifice. I'm just saying that we all really need to put some flesh in the game. Most people would like to be better connected, but they are timid and afraid of rejection, just like you are. Sometimes the distance between us needs to be bridged with an honest apology. One of the people who told a crazy story about me to that private investigator came to me years later and apologized. She said, "I lied about you because they wanted me to lie about you, and I'm sorry I did it." And then she became one of the founding members of our church. It is possible to reconcile across a huge bridge, but it takes three things. First, it takes humility. Humility to admit that you made a mistake. Secondly, it takes the courage to be honest enough to speak up and to ask to be forgiven. And on the other side of the fence, it requires the ego strength to be able to forgive someone who firmly planted a dagger in your back. Sometimes all that is necessary for you to bridge the gap is for you to get over your prejudice. Prejudices that you have nurtured that really only scream about your own insecurity. Let it go. Risk showing someone else acceptance. Imagine how our world might have been different today if only Donald Trump's father had paid some attention to him before he became the world's most dangerous egomaniac.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.